I've never told this story publicly before, not because I'm afraid people won't believe it. The truth is much worse. I'm afraid they will believe it, because what happened wasn't supernatural. There were no ghosts, no demons, and no monsters hiding in the dark. Just a group of friends who thought a prank would be funny, and one person who never came back from it. There were 6 of us in our friend group. We had all known each other for years, and like most groups of young people, we spent a lot of time trying to outdo each other with jokes and pranks. Most of them were harmless. Replacing someone's drink with salt water, jump scares, fake messages. Things that embarrassed people for a few minutes before everyone laughed about it. But one person in our group had a fear that was no joke. A severe fear of confined spaces. Everyone knew it. It wasn't some secret. Even mentioning elevators or crawl spaces could make him visibly uncomfortable. Years earlier, he had gotten trapped somewhere as a child. He never shared the full story, but whatever happened left permanent scars. If he found himself in a tight space, panic took over almost immediately. His breathing would speed up, his hands would shake. Sometimes he would have full panic attacks. We all knew this, which is exactly why some people in the group thought it would make the perfect prank. It started during a weekend gathering. We were hanging out late into the night. There was food, music, and the usual stupid conversations that happen when everyone stays up too long. At some point, the topic of fears came up. Spiders, heights, darkness. Then someone jokingly brought up confined spaces. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. The claustrophobic friend laughed awkwardly and said he didn't want to talk about it. Most of us dropped the subject. A couple of others didn't. They started making jokes. What if we locked you in a closet? What if the power went out in an elevator? What if you woke up in a box? He tried laughing it off, but I could tell he wasn't comfortable. Eventually, he walked away from the conversation. I remember thinking the jokes had gone too far. I should have said something. Instead, I stayed quiet. That decision still bothers me. Later that night, while he was in another room, 3 people from the group started planning something. I overheard pieces of it. At first, I thought they were kidding. Then I realized they weren't. They wanted to scare him, just for a few minutes. They kept repeating that. Only a few minutes. Nothing serious. We let him out right away. The plan sounded incredibly stupid, but they were laughing so much that nobody seemed to think about what could actually happen. I told them it was a bad idea. One of them rolled his eyes. Another said I was overreacting. The third said they knew exactly how far to take it. Looking back, that's the sentence that sticks with me most. We know exactly how far to take it. No, they didn't. A little after midnight, the opportunity appeared. Our friend had fallen asleep on a couch. Everyone else was still awake. The pranksters decided this was their chance. I immediately told them not to do it. Again, they ignored me. One of them said they would have him out in less than 2 minutes. That was supposedly the whole joke. Wake him up somewhere unexpected, watch him panic, reveal the prank, everybody laughs. End of story. At least that was the plan. There was an old storage container on the property. It wasn't being used anymore. It was metal, narrow, and mostly empty. The moment I saw where they were taking him, I felt sick. Even standing inside it made me uncomfortable. The walls felt too close. The air felt stale. The door was thick and heavy. It looked exactly like the kind of place someone with severe claustrophobia should never be. Ever. But they carried him there anyway, still asleep, still completely unaware. I remember standing nearby arguing with them, telling them to stop, telling them this wasn't funny. They laughed. One of them even filmed part of it on a phone. They genuinely believed it would become one of those stories everyone talks about later. The door closed. A lock clicked. And everything changed. At first there was silence, then banging, Violent banging, the kind that instantly tells you someone is terrified. The person inside woke up and immediately started screaming. Not shouting, not yelling, screaming, pure panic. The sound sent chills through me. I remember hearing desperate pounding against the metal walls. The noise echoed through the night. The pranksters were laughing initially. That lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the screams became worse, much worse. The voice coming from inside sounded completely different. Desperate. Animal-like. A person convinced they were trapped, convinced they couldn't escape. The banging grew louder and faster. Then came pleading, begging, sobbing. The kind of fear that shouldn't be used as entertainment. One of the pranksters finally stopped smiling. Another looked uncertain. The third still insisted everything was fine. He'll calm down. He just needs a second. He knows we're here. But the person inside didn't know that, at least not anymore. Panic had taken over. Then we heard a loud crash. Something hit the wall hard. The screaming continued. Then another crash, and another. The sounds became frantic, almost chaotic, as if he was throwing himself against every surface searching for a way out. I shouted at them to open the door, immediately. Finally, they agreed. One of them stepped forward, reached for the lock, and froze. The lock wouldn't move. At first, everyone thought it was a joke. They tried again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The mechanism had jammed. 1 second, everyone was annoyed. The next second, everyone was terrified. Because suddenly, the prank wasn't controlled anymore. Suddenly, nobody was in charge. Inside, the screaming became even more frantic. We shouted through the door, telling him to calm down, telling him we were opening it. But panic doesn't work that way, especially not for someone with severe claustrophobia. He couldn't see us, couldn't verify what we were saying. All he knew was that he was trapped. Several people began pulling on the door. Others searched for tools. The container was old. The metal had rusted. The lock mechanism refused to cooperate. Every second felt longer than the last. Inside, the sounds continued. Banging, crying, gasping, screaming. Then something happened that I will never forget. The screaming suddenly stopped, not gradually, instantly. The silence felt wrong, terribly wrong. We all heard it. Everyone froze. No banging, no shouting, nothing. One of the pranksters started yelling his name repeatedly. No answer. Another began kicking the door. Still nothing. That was when real panic began. Not the panic from inside, our panic. The next several minutes were chaos. People ran for tools, heavy equipment, anything that might force the door open. The silence on the other side never changed. No movement, no voice, nothing. When the door finally opened, nobody was prepared for what they found. He was lying on the floor, motionless, unresponsive. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if our brains refused to process what we were seeing. Then someone rushed forward, then everyone else. Emergency services were called immediately. People attempted first aid. Others stood frozen. Some were crying. Some were shaking. One person kept repeating that it was only supposed to be a joke, over and over, like saying it enough times would somehow change reality. It didn't. The investigation later concluded that an extreme panic response had triggered a medical emergency. The exact details aren't important. What matters is that by the time help arrived, it was too late. A prank that was supposed to last a couple of minutes had ended a life. The aftermath destroyed the friend group completely. Nobody stayed in contact. People blamed each other. Some blamed themselves. Some couldn't handle what happened and moved away. The people who planned the prank never escaped the consequences, neither legally nor emotionally. And honestly, I don't think any punishment could ever equal what they have to live with, knowing they caused it, knowing it was preventable, knowing they ignored every warning. Years have passed since then. Most people involved never speak about it anymore. but I think about it often, especially when I hear people say things like, it's just a prank. Relax. It's only a joke. Because sometimes people forget something important. A joke only stays a joke when everyone is laughing. The moment someone's deepest fear becomes the entertainment, you've crossed a line. And sometimes that line can't be uncrossed. I still remember the last thing I heard before the silence. The desperate pounding against the metal walls. The sound of someone begging to be let out. The sound of someone who believed they were completely alone. And every time I think about it, I wonder how different things might have been if just one more person had stepped in and said, no, before the door closed. I used to think the worst thing a prank could do was embarrass someone. I don't think that anymore. Because some pranks don't leave bruises, they leave scars in your mind, and years later they're still there. Back when I was in college, a group of us rented a house together during summer break. There were 5 of us living there, the kind of group that constantly messed with each other. Nobody was safe. People woke up with shaving cream on their faces. Phones got hidden. Rooms got rearranged while someone was asleep. Every week, someone became the target. One guy in particular loved pulling pranks. He was creative, relentless, and always looking for new ways to scare people. Most of the time, it was funny. Most of the time. One evening, we were sitting around talking about weird fears. Not spiders or snakes, specific fears. One roommate admitted he was terrified of emergency alerts. At first, everyone laughed because it sounded ridiculous. Then he explained why. When he was younger, a tornado warning had gone off in the middle of the night. The storm destroyed several homes nearby. Nobody in his family was hurt, but he said the sound of emergency alerts still made his stomach drop. Even years later, he hated hearing them, hated them. The tone instantly put him on edge. Of course, the prank-loving roommate saw an opportunity. The moment he heard that, he got a grin on his face, the kind of grin that usually meant trouble. I remember telling him to leave it alone. He nodded. But I knew him. That wasn't the face of someone who was going to leave it alone. About a week later, strange things started happening. The roommate with the fear began receiving emergency alert sounds on his phone, randomly. Sometimes during class, sometimes while eating, sometimes in the middle of the night, the sound would blast at full volume, then stop. No message, nothing. Just the alert tone. At first he thought his phone was malfunctioning. He checked settings, downloaded updates, even contacted support. Nothing explained it. Then it started happening on other devices, a laptop, a tablet, even a smart speaker. The same emergency alert tone, over and over, always when he least expected it. The prankster denied everything, every single time. He acted confused, concerned even, pretending he had no idea what was happening. Eventually, our roommate became genuinely disturbed. I could see it. He started jumping whenever his phone vibrated. He stopped sleeping well. Every unexpected noise made him flinch. But the prank continued. What none of us knew was how far it was about to go. One Friday night, everyone except him went out. He stayed home because he wasn't feeling well. A few hours later, the prankster got an idea. A horrible idea. One that still makes me angry when I think about it. Using equipment from a media project, he created a fake emergency broadcast. Not some amateur recording. A convincing one. It included warning tones, official-sounding announcements, weather radar graphics, scrolling text, everything. The video claimed a dangerous chemical release had occurred nearby. Residents were instructed to remain indoors and avoid contact with others. It looked surprisingly real. Too real. His plan was simple. He would remotely cast the video onto the television while our roommate was home alone. The roommate would panic. Then we'd reveal the joke. Everyone laughs. End of story. That was supposedly the plan. Around midnight, we were all hanging out elsewhere when the prankster decided to do it. He connected remotely, started the broadcast, and waited. A minute later, he got a text. Just one message. "Dude, what is happening?" Everyone laughed. The prankster laughed hardest. He sent back vague responses, making the situation seem more believable. Another text arrived. "Are you guys seeing this?" Then, my phone got the alert too. That wasn't true. The roommate's phone hadn't received anything. But the prankster had secretly programmed it to play the warning tone at the same time the fake broadcast started. Everyone was still laughing, at least initially. Then the texts became more frantic. "What chemical? Should I leave? Nobody is answering. I can't get local news." The prankster kept the lie going, telling him he didn't know what was happening, telling him to stay inside, telling him authorities were probably handling it. The mood started changing, at least for me, because it didn't sound like someone getting mildly scared anymore. It sounded like someone genuinely believing they were in danger. I told him to end it immediately. He refused, said he wanted a few more minutes, just a little longer. 5 minutes turned into 10, 10 turned into 15. Then we stopped receiving messages altogether. At first, nobody cared. We assumed he'd figured it out, or gone to bed, or turned off his phone. An hour later, we headed home. The prankster was still laughing, still proud of himself, still talking about how funny the reveal would be. The house was completely dark when we arrived. No lights, no television, nothing. We walked inside. The living room was empty. The television had been unplugged. Furniture was moved slightly out of place, and the front door had multiple locks engaged. Every single one. Something felt wrong, immediately. We found him upstairs, sitting in a corner, holding a baseball bat. At first, he didn't even recognize us. Not right away. His eyes looked unfocused, wide, terrified. When he finally realized who we were, he exploded. Not physically, emotionally. He started yelling, demanding answers, demanding to know what was happening, demanding to know whether the warning was real. The prankster finally admitted everything, smiling at first, expecting relief, expecting laughter, expecting the situation to instantly become funny. It didn't. The roommate just stared at him for a long time, without saying anything. Then he walked into his room and shut the door. Hard. Nobody heard from him for the rest of the night. The next morning he left, packed a bag, got in his car, and disappeared for several days. When he returned, he barely spoke. Not just to the prankster, to anyone. Weeks passed. Things never returned to normal. Eventually, he told me what happened that night. And honestly, it was worse than I expected. Much worse. After seeing the emergency broadcast, he became convinced a disaster was unfolding. When messages stopped loading properly because of poor reception, he interpreted it as communication failures. When nobody answered immediately, he assumed something terrible had happened. The silence made everything worse. He spent hours checking windows, listening for sirens, watching the road outside, waiting for signs of danger. At one point, he became convinced he heard helicopters. Another time, he thought he smelled chemicals. Neither was real. Fear was filling in the blanks. By the time we arrived home, he'd worked himself into a state of complete panic. He genuinely believed he might die. Not because of a monster, not because of a ghost, because people he trusted convinced him danger was real. The prank ended that night, but the effects didn't. Over the following months, he changed. A lot. Sudden alerts made him panic. Emergency sirens made him panic. Weather warnings made him panic. Unexpected notifications made him panic. Sometimes he'd immediately leave stores if an alarm sounded. Sometimes he'd become visibly shaken from hearing emergency broadcasts on television. He eventually sought professional help. And from what I understand, it did help, but not completely. Years later, I ran into him unexpectedly. We ended up talking about old times. Most subjects made him smile. That one didn't. When I asked whether he still thought about the prank, he laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't believe how much damage a joke had caused. He admitted something that stuck with me. He said before that night, he was afraid of emergency alerts. After that night, he became afraid of uncertainty itself. Not knowing whether information was real, not knowing whether people were telling the truth, not knowing whether danger was genuine. A single prank had damaged his trust, and trust is much harder to rebuild than most people realize. The prankster eventually apologized countless times. To his credit, he genuinely felt terrible. But some things can't simply be fixed with an apology. The friend group slowly drifted apart after college. Life happened. People moved away. Careers started. Families grew. But every so often, I remember that night, especially when I see videos online where people scare their friends for views. Because many of those videos end before the consequences begin. People see the scream, the reaction, the laughter, the reveal. What they don't see is what happens afterward. The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the fear, the lingering damage. Sometimes the scariest horror stories aren't about killers or ghosts. Sometimes they're about ordinary people making one stupid decision, a decision that lasts only minutes, but changes someone else's life for years. And that's exactly what happened that night. The prank lasted less than 20 minutes. The fear never completely left.